Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another week of Radio Production 3. I have a lot of stuff I'm going to go through today. A lot of it's going to go by very fast. So absolutely make sure if you have questions, make sure you get back to me and ask your questions. There are no bad questions about this. And what we're talking about today is voice effects and VST effects. And this is the stuff that we can really be super creative with and make things sound different and really play around with sound a lot. So if we go back to semester 2, when we started in on voice effects in semester 2, it was reverb and the difference between delay and echo. And reverb, remember, is just a really fancy echo that has a number of really closely spaced repeats, and that simulates acoustic environments. So I could have a reverb that sounds like the gym, I could have a reverb that sounds like the bathroom, and depending on what I was doing with my production, one of those or something in between might be the right sound to really simulate an acoustic environment. Delay is just one repeat. So if our original audio is bang, the delay would be bang, bang, just one repeat. Echo is multiple repeats. So bang, and then bang, 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 fading out. And remember, one of the effects modules here, if I look in Audition, if we look in delay and echo, the echo plugin has EQ on it, so each repeat can have its own echo, and that echo accumulates. The other one there was the analog delay, and this simulates tape or older tube electronics, analog electronics, so it doesn't sound quite as pristine. And this is my choice for all my echo needs, even though it's called analog delay. So we're going to show you a bunch of things in a minute. We're going to go through a couple of menus in Audition. I'm going to show you some outside third-party add-ins that we can use with Audition, and I will show you Pro Tools as well. But the first thing I want you to understand is I want you to use all these effects, and I want you to use them in good health, and I want you to use them to make really neat sounding promos and station imaging and even commercials. And like, this stuff is just ridiculously fun to play with. But I had an epiphany in my career, and this would have been about 15 years ago now. So about 5 years before I started at Loyalist. And my program director came in to me after I had done a real, I thought was fantastic, whiz-bang promo, all kinds of sounds going left and right, just all kinds of echoes, everything was EQ'd differently. Oh, it was cool, I thought. And he asked me one simple question. He said, in a promo, who's the client? Well, we're the client in a promo. The station is the client. And what's the most important thing in a promo? Making sure you get the station name right so people know what station they're listening to, because people are, wearing out the seek button in their car. I said, yes. So there was so much effects and so many things happening in my promo, it was making it hard to know the station name. So after that, I started stripping stuff out and coming out with much more solid promos. I mean, I could still do all the weird effects and stuff, but now I was targeting them. I was putting them in for a reason. I mean, if I go back earlier in my career, I would have echoes where every subsequent, every repeat in the echo would drop down in pitch. So you'd have 1066666. It was cool. Or I would have that EQ accumulating on those repeats. I would have delay EQ that would morph over the length of a sentence. So it would start out normal, and by the time we got to the end of a sentence, it would sound almost telephony. right? And I was doing all these great things that I thought, wow, that's really ear catching. And I'd have the other producers in town call me up, go, how did you do that? And I could still do all that stuff today. Some of the effects have been removed from Audition, but I could find other ways of doing them. But it didn't help to get the message across. So when the program director came in and said, you're doing too much, pull it back and target it, what it became is like, follow me, what it became is like interior design. Now, you may guess, just looking at me and what I do for fun, that I really don't care about interior design, and you would be 100% correct. This is my wife's thing. She says, here's the can of paint, put this paint on this wall. And I go, terrific, because I really like painting. You tell me what can of paint goes where. Don't tell me what color, because I don't know that. I'm colorblind. But you say this can goes on this wall. I'm going to have a very pleasant afternoon painting the wall. But there's a thing in interior design called accent walls. It's like my friend of mine's house. He has this nice, very beige living room, but it opens up into his dining room, which he has painted fire engine red. So it looks something like, let me open this for you. So it looks something like this, right? It's a very nice beige or white room. And then all of a sudden, bang, orange wall. And it draws your attention to that wall. In this case, it draws your attention to the wall for the view outside and the painting on it. Another way to look at it would be something like this. Like this looks like my grandmother's living room, except my grandmother's living room doesn't have that one dark color, right? It would be with the whites or the off-whites. But that one accent wall really draws your attention to it, and it draws your attention to it for a reason. So that's how I kind of remapped my brain for using voice effects. I wouldn't have these on every line in the promo. I would find specific areas I wanted to target. I might want to target the artist name in a promo, or the station name, or, you can win. Stuff I want the listener to really pick up on. That's where I'm going to use some of these effects, and I'm going to bring them in and bring them out. So remember, when you're using effects, you have to leave space for stuff. So look at this session I have here. This is a session for Lighthouse appearing at Empire Theatre. And if I just play a bit of this.
An iconic Canadian rock and roll band is celebrating 50 years. It'll be an unforgettable night, Thursday, October 3rd. That'll take you back to those sunny days with their unmistakable powerhouse sound of guitars, percussion, and horns. It's Lighthouse, live at Belleville's Empire Theatre. Canadian musical heritage at its best. Lighthouse in concert, Thursday, October 3rd at the Empire Theatre. Tickets at the box office, 969-0099 or empiretheatre.com.
So sorry, that little stumble in there. I've got a lot of things going on with this computer right now. It just kind of overloaded. But did you notice on the voice parts here? So here I've got my main voice, and I've got these little bits that I've moved over into another channel. And that's because I've got an echo happening on this. And in this case, the echo is going through a separate EQ. And you can sort of see that on the mixer. So we will talk about busing next week. But what I've done is I've taken all the voice parts and put them over on this one fader that has my compressor and my EQ on it. And then one channel, that little one right here, I have taken a parallel output from it. And again, we'll get to all this next week, so don't worry that you don't understand this yet. And I'm putting the analog delay and the FFT filter on it. So that's why the repeats have a different EQ than the rest of the voice. But the point of this is, if you're adding echo, if you're adding reverb, you have to make space for that echo and reverb to continue. If I go to that voice part and just put echo on this, and you can see the duration here is 1.2 seconds, and I put 2 seconds of echo on that, it's never going to fit in, right? Because 2 seconds is going to be way over here, and it's not going to be in the part that I want it to be. The echo is going to get cut off, or as I call it, guillotined. So when I'm using echo and reverb, I put what the part of the script I want people to really focus on in a separate track, and I put my echo and reverb on that. So even if I've got a short piece of audio like this, there's space for that echo to continue through, space for that echo to continue through, space for this echo and this echo and this echo to continue all the way through. So make space for your effects. Use lots of tracks. You have an unlimited number of tracks. Here I've got 9 tracks, 3 buses, and a master. And again, we'll get to all of that next week. Don't worry about it. But I could have everything on separate tracks. In fact, I really like having everything on separate tracks. It makes it much easier to add my effects, and I add my effects in the mixer window. So don't be adding effects just on a tiny little bit where the effect continues on past the audio, because it's going to get chopped off. You want to make sure you move it to different tracks so the echo or the reverb can resolve. Okay, simple effects we can do. Let me take the voice part here, and I'm going to put it in over here because these are the music tracks. So there's Lighthouse VO.
An iconic Canadian rock and roll band is celebrating 50.
And the simplest effect we can do is something called doubling. And doubling is just copying the voice part or whatever part you want to double up to a separate track, and then zooming in and offsetting it slightly. I would couple that if I go to my mixer and track 5 is over here. Maybe I'm going to pan this a little bit to one side, and I might have my doubling happening a lot. In fact, I might copy this down to another track, and then copy here, and then go to my mixer on track 7 and put my doubling over to the right channel. So now if I go back and play those,
an iconic Canadian rock and roll band is...
So you get a really quick kind of separation there. And of course, I wouldn't have all 3 of them at the same volume. I would drop that and drop that. So now,
an iconic Canadian rock and roll band is celebrating.
So it just makes your voice part a little bit bigger. So that's called a double. And a double is just literally copying a double part, or in this case, a triple part, to adjacent tracks, maybe panning them a little bit, adjusting the volumes a little bit, and just making it seem a little bit bigger. It's like a very simple echo. And again, I wouldn't have this if I kind of zoom out here. You can see that it's going to be the entire voice track that's doubled up. I wouldn't do that. Way too much. Total overkill. I would have that in selected areas and get rid of what I don't need and just have my original track here. So you can double anything. Usually you would double up a voice. So it's a fairly simple effect, but it can really make things stand out, which is what you're trying to do. Now, let me go back over to waveform here. And we're going to delve into, first of all, the modulation menu. And the modulation menu is built up of a couple of effects here. So chorus, flanger, and phaser, and then it has one that's both at the same time. But chorus is fairly simple. Let me scroll down here. So you might be familiar with this song. So that's, of course, Nirvana, Come As You Are, and the guitar at the beginning part has what's called a chorus effect on it. So chorus takes your original and tries and makes it sound like it's 3 or 4 things the same happening at the same time, but just slightly different. So here's some examples for chorus.
I am not a sex pervert. Thank God.
You'll remember that. And if we put chorus on it.
I am not a sex pervert. Thank God.
So chorus has a slight echo and something called modulation on it, which sort of changes the pitch slightly as it goes through. So this is what the chorus module looks like. And number of voices would be the number of repeats or number of times things are happening. And of course, 16 would be an awful lot. But the presets here are a great place to start. I think that one was 5 voice or acoustic duet is probably what that was. So if I go back here, let me cancel this and go to the original voice part and go back to modulation and chorus. And now just try this.
I am not a sex pervert.
So it sounds like 2 people talking at the same time. And we can make this sound like 5 people talking at the same time.
I am not a sex pervert.
Or we can make it sound like 10 people talking at the same time.
I am not a sex pervert.
You notice that sort of plays around with your levels. So you have to monitor here your output levels and decide on the mix between the original or dry and the wet and make sure it doesn't go beyond 100%.
I am not.
All right, so that's adding a lot.
I am not a sex pervert. Thank God. I am not.
And you'll see as you look at various voices here, various presets, the modulation is going to change. So that's the cycle of pitch change. Here the modulation depth is only 4 dB, so it's only a little bit, but it's happening almost 10 times a second at 9 hertz.
I am not a sex pervert.
So that'll give you a little bit of a waver in it. And some of the presets here are really fun to play with.
I am not a sex pervert.
So that's got a longer delay time. So we're getting into 20 milliseconds delay. And we're really widening it out. It's coming now beyond where the left and right speakers would be. Robotic bee attack. Oh, because it doesn't have anything there in the outputs. So we'll turn that back up.
I am not a sex pervert.
Too much.
I am not a sex pervert. Thank God.
So that's got a lot of feedback happening, a very deep modulation. So chorus is used to double up on a voice part and make it sound a little bit fuller, a little bit richer, maybe a little bit wider. And if you target it on specific areas, it really draws the listener's attention to it. So again, chorus adds multiple short delays, small amounts of feedback, and some modulation. Chorus obviously works best with stereo files. Mono chorus sounds just kind of wishy-washy. Flanging is the next one I want to look at. And flanging as an effect, so it sounds kind of like this. Let's go with both tracks. Makes it sound very hollow and tubey. So there's the sound. So you hear that kind of washing through it, where it's kind of swishing through it, and you can add a much more intense flange as well. And the reason it's called flanging, this was originally developed in the 1960s. The Beatles kind of discovered this by accident. So remember you probably know what a reel of tape looks like, the big round thing that plays from one reel, and as it plays, it gets taken up by the other reel. And the tape is stored in something called a flange, the outside of that reel of tape. If you have two things on two reels of tape, the same, playing at the same time, and you take your thumb and manually rub it against one of the reels as it's playing, it will slightly move one thing out of perfect sync relationship. So like a double, like chorus, flange has a very small delay to it. So if we look at the flanging effect in modulation, you'll see it looks pretty much the same. The delay times are going to be much smaller. Remember, our chorus, some of them had 20 millisecond delay. A lot of flanging delays are going to be in the, 4 millisecond range. So it's like just off being in sync. And it moves stuff out of phase, and it will modulate as it goes. So if we go back to our voice effect with a flange, it would sound like this.
I am not a sex pervert. Thank God.
And we'll flange that.
I am not a sex pervert. Thank God.
So it comes in, it comes out. Sometimes it builds up the voice. And at the end here, you can hear how it's sort of canceling itself out.
Thank God.
But it really grabs people's attention if you use it the right way. So flanging, again, we'll look at some of the presets here. The presets are a good place to start. And then you kind of screw up the preset by playing around with stuff and getting the more exact sound you're looking for. So this has a very 60s sound. So if we use Haight-Ashbury.
I am not a sex pervert. Thank God. I am not.
So you can hear how it's kind of washing through very slowly. And again, that's due to very small delays, very small offsets. Hell's Chorus.
I am not a sex pervert. Thank God.
And again, we're getting into a very fast delay here, or very fast modulation, 7 times a second. And we can adjust this as we go. Too many pills? Sure, let's give this a shot.
I am not a sex pervert. Thank God.
That's happening 30 times a second. That's why it's wavering so hard. And we can adjust this to be in time with the music, which would be really cool. So we could have that sweep go through in time with the music. So if we want to have the modulation rate over 1 beat, we would tell the session what our session tempo is. We will get to that in coming weeks. But now we can put effects in time with what we are doing. So a really slow modulation.
I am not a sex pervert. Thank God. I am.
So flange and chorus are kind of the same thing. They're certainly first cousins, which is why you have the combined flange chorus. Speed, how fast things are going to happen, how wide you want the modulation to be in width, how intense, how deep do you want that to go. So I don't particularly use the combined module here. I don't find it very effective. I like going and having more control, as you may or may not have already figured out. So I like this one. This gives me more control. I understand this better. So chorus uses a slightly longer delay time. Flanger uses a very, very small delay time, and that offsets the doubling. And then we add feedback to that and modulation, so we change the pitch very slightly, and that gives us the chorus and flange sound. There is a third one here, and this also goes back to the 60s, and this is called phaser. And again, if you're a fan of music from the 1960s, you may be aware of a band called The Faces or The Small Faces. right. So I want to get rid of that. There we go. So it was called the Small Faces first because everybody was really short. And then two of the small faces left, and they brought in two taller guys, so they couldn't be the small faces anymore. They were just the faces. This is where Rod Stewart got his start. This is where Ronnie Wood of the Rolling Stones got his second start, you might say. But they had a big hit called Itchy Coo Park. Big hit. Right around the Beatles' time, it was really kind of very druggy. And in the middle of it, it has this big area that has been phased. And it sounds like this.
I feel inclined to blow my mind, guitar, beat the ducks with a bun. They all come out to groove about, be nice and have fun in the sun.
60s. It was a great time. I was really little. I think I missed most of it. But phasing, where are we here? Phasing effect. So if I put an effect on, it's got that kind of sweepy sound that flanger has, but it's a little bit more prominent. So if that's our initial sound, and then we put this through a phaser, you can hear that sweep happening. And if we go back to our regular voice part, when we put it through a phaser, which is what the effect is called, phasing or phaser.
I am not a sex pervert. Thank God.
So that sounds like an old analog radio tuning knob, right? It sounds like you're tuning in and out on the frequency.
I am not a sex pervert. Thank God.
And we're using these effects to create things that are, to get our listeners' attention. So that's our voice part again. And if I run this through the phaser, again, start with the presets. So we don't have, delay times here. This is all modulation. How much we are going to change the pitch slightly and bring it back. How are we going to mix between the dry and wet outputs? So start here, Led Zeppelin.
I am not a sex pervert. Thank God. I am not a...
And if we just use this to really draw to somebody's attention, it really sounds cool.
I am not a sex pervert. Thank God.
Shimmer phase. Look at this. Everything jumped up fairly high. So this is going to be fairly intense, I think.
I am not a sex pervert. Thank God.
So that just adds a little...
I am not a sex pervert. Thank God.
So you can see that you can really screw things up with this. So you wouldn't want to put everything in the world through this. It's like a friend of mine. She's on the air still in Winnipeg, so I'm not going to give you her name. But she's a lovely woman, really heart of gold, really quite attractive. And I think she's smoking hot because she rides motorcycles too. But when I first met her, she was in her early 30s. She would definitely be into her mid to late 40s by now. Very attractive woman. She just has one thing that she can't get rid of from being a teenager. And that's frosted white eyeshadow. Right? So she's made up. She looks great. She goes out on station appearances. And when you get a chance to talk to her, she has frosted white eyeshadow on. And when she blinks, it's like her eyeballs have just rolled back into the back of her head because all you see is white here. When she opens her eye, you can see she actually has an eye and pupils. But when she blinks, everything whites out. And the first time I was talking to her, she was blinking a couple of times because the studio was really bright. And I was totally focused and freaked out by the fact that her eyes kept disappearing because she had too much of something that was distracting from what we were talking about. And it's the same thing. If you use too much of an effect, it's like you're a 45-year-old woman wearing frosted white eyeshadow like a 16-year-old girl, and it just doesn't go together. So we have to use these maybe subtly. We have to use these in combination with other effects, but we have to use it in targeted areas at specific parts of the script, at specific parts of the voice track. Okay, so don't slather this stuff everywhere. It should not look like DNA in a slasher movie everywhere in a promo. Use it in very targeted areas. Trust me, you will still kill the bad guy, right? But you got to use it in specific areas, find specific words that you want to highlight. One of the people I've mentored in his career for well over a decade now is a guy named Jay Helmus. And Jay Helmus, his career went, follow this career. He was at Algonquin College. First job was in Timmins, where he worked with Rick Harrington. From Timmins, he went to Toronto to work in Rogers at CHFI. From Toronto, he went to Vancouver to work on the rock station there, Rock 101, I believe it is. And then from there, he went back to Toronto to be the imaging director of 102.1 The Edge. Nice career. When Jay started out in Timmins, he was putting like chorus all the way through a promo and delays and reverbs and just way too much stuff. I couldn't understand what was going on in his promos. And coming up towards the end of the semester, I'll play some of Jay's work in context of a production demo. And I have an early one and I have a late one. The early one has way too much effects. It's painted everywhere. In the second demo, he's targeted it much better. So learn from Jay's career, learn from my career. Don't slather this stuff everywhere. Use it specific instances where you want to draw somebody's attention to stuff. All right. So that is the modulation effects menu. I like these effects a lot. I have to really restrain myself from not using them everywhere. But there's another menu I want to take a look at, and that's called the special menu. And this is kind of odds and ends effects. Some of them are fantastic, and I really, really like them. Some of them I have absolutely no place for. So I want to go back to my Lighthouse VO. All right, and I want to go back to the beginning and look at the special menu. The first thing here is distortion. Why would I want to use distortion? I've spent so much time making sure my voice is really clear. It's recorded with good levels. So, I'm cutting off the peaks so I'm not distorting the software. But have you ever listened to a rock station or an alternative station? The music is really guitar heavy and distorted guitar heavy. And sometimes a distorted voice effect can really fit in. So here's one preset in the distortion module.
An iconic Canadian rock and roll band is celebrating 50 years.
Would I want that all the way through a promo? Of course not. If you did that, I would hunt you down and slap you on the wrist for that. But I can use this. Maybe I'm going to distort an echo in the background, have my original voice dry, but my echo has distortion on it. My delay has distortion on it. Just to do something different that really adds some texture and really sounds cool. You have to be careful with this because this will really screw up your levels. Right, so if I just put a little bit of distortion with tape drive, look what this does to my levels.
An iconic Canadian rock and roll band is celebrating 50 years.
And I really don't like this very much, as I'm not having a whole bunch of control here. I'm just adding the distortion to it. I can't fix my overall levels. I can't control the mix of this. I kind of like the effect I'm getting. I could see where I would really use that in the background, or I might use it to really draw attention to a part of the voice. But I don't have a lot of control, so I'm not hugely popular on this one. I will show you something else later that probably works a little better. And I can go back to the special menu, and if I don't like that, I'm just going to drop down to Guitar Suite here. This gives me a little bit more control. This is modeled after what the industry is doing, and that a lot of audio producers are really like certain pieces of hardware audio processing stuff. But the problem is some of that hardware audio processing stuff is vintage, and it's really super expensive if you can get it, and generally you can't get it. So what the digital world does is it models what that processor does. So this kind of models going through a guitar amp. And this has a bunch of neat things that you can do to play with. It's got a really simple compressor. Here the compressor is more or less. It doesn't have a threshold. It doesn't have a ratio, the attack release stuff. So I might want to not use that. The filter is fairly simple. It's only a single band EQ. What kind of filter I'm going to have here? Talkbox, which make your voice sound distorted on vowel sounds. What kind of filter is it? Is it a high pass, band pass, or low pass? Remember, low pass passes the low frequencies, so that affects the high frequencies, whereas a high pass filter gets rid of the low frequencies, and band pass is around a specific frequency range. So if I'm going to use EQ, am I going to use this? No, I'm going to use parametric. But then we get into distortion. How much distortion do we want? Do we want smooth, or do we want it to sound really nasty? Right? So we can take smooth, and then it models a specific amplifier. So you could have classic American combo that would be like a Fender guitar amp. British stack would be like a Marshall. Dual chorus would be like a Roland JC120, and various combinations thereof, right? So you would have different sounds. Deep 410 would be Fender Bassmaster 410, 412. So I can add things in, and because mix, I can control how much this is happening. I'm going to make this sound like a British Marshall amp. I'm going to add that to my
An
voice.
iconic Canadian rock and roll band is celebrating 50 years. It'll be an unforgettable night, Thursday, October 3rd. That'll take you back to those sunny days with their unmistakable powerhouse sound of guitars, percussion, and horns. It's Lighthouse, live at Belleville's Empire Theatre.
So you can hear there that I'm adding a lot of distortion, but I'm managing to keep my levels more or less
Iconic Canadian
under
rock and roll
control.
band is celebrating 50 years. It'll be an unforgettable night.
And if I
Thursday,
just want to add it
October
as an
3rd. That'll
accent,
take you
I
back to
add
those
in a
sunny
little
days
bit of the
with
wet.
their unmistakable powerhouse sound of guitars, percussion, and horns. It's Lighthouse, live at Belleville's Empire Theatre.
So again, I would use that on a rock station or an alternative station only that I am trying to make the accents fit in with the rest of the promo and the rest of the programming. Is distortion an acceptable effect? Sure, it's just a different kind of EQ, really. So I think that's pretty cool. I might play with that. I much like the Guitar Suite compared to the regular distortion. Now, in the special menu, I skipped over Doppler shift. And Doppler shift is something that does happen in real life. So what the Doppler effect is the pitch of a sound changes depending on your relation to it in a physical space. So the classic example here is when an ambulance passes by. So if you're in a car and you hear a siren coming, you're supposed to pull over. So you pull over because you see the ambulance behind you, lights and sirens going. As the ambulance gets closer to you, it seems like the pitch rises, but that part's kind of subtle. Where the Doppler shift really comes in is as it goes past you, then the Doppler shift takes the sound and it makes it sound like the pitch is dropping. So the farther the ambulance gets away from you, the more the pitch of the sound drops off. And I can really explain this in more depth if you want, but if you just think of the waveform that the sound is making, as it gets closer to you, each one of those waves gets closer and closer together, which creates a higher pitch. As it gets farther and farther away from you, that same pitch of the siren, and remember that doesn't change, but now the waveform gets stretched out and the wave cycles happen farther and farther apart, which means lower frequency, which is why that pitch seems to sound like it's dropping. This is really cool effect. Would I use this on a voice? Never, because it changes the pitch like that. Would I use this on something like the breaker sounds that you use to sort of separate different parts of a mix? Yeah, I really would, because it also gets into panning. So here's it just on a voice, but whizzing by left to right. You can see what that voice section is. It's 14 seconds. But look down here where it's previewed. It's only like a tiny fraction. So watch what happens when I play this.
It'll be an unforgettable night, Thursday, October 3rd.
So the pitch is rising until it gets back in balance, and then it starts dropping. So we can play around with this as well. Passing by closely right to left, you can see we are going right to left, and it's very close to our center line. Play this.
An unforgettable night.
So you can see this is an effect that's really going to happen quite quickly. Ambulance, it's a little farther away.
An iconic Canadian rock and roll band is celebrating 50 years.
But you can hear that panning and that phase shift of the Doppler shift as it goes by. So the pitch rises, the pitch drops. So does that work on voice? I don't think that works on voice at all. I would never use it on voice. But I might use it on a music piece or a sound, particularly on a sound piece, like a swooshy sound. And I would put it on that to make it really go across the sound spectrum from left speaker to right speaker or vice versa. So phase Doppler shift, cool. Really target when you use it. Another one you really target when you use is the mastering effect. So the good thing about this is that it's a string of effects built into one. The bad thing about this is it's not as good as the regular full effects, but there are two things here that I think are brilliant and I use on a frequent basis. So as you look here, you've got an equalizer, reverb, exciter, widener, loudness, output gain. So equalizer, 3-band, parametric. Why would I want 3-band when I have 5-band or a 7-band or a 9-band equalizer built into the parametric EQ? Why would I use this? I wouldn't. I would turn that off. Reverb. This is more or less reverb. Again, why would I use that when I can use the reverb effects and target the parameters in those effects much more closely to what I want from that? So, amount of reverb I would use? None. Then we get to the good stuff. Exciter is something called an aural exciter, and what that does is it exaggerates the high frequencies. So it makes everything brighter and crisper. And it does this in an analog way, which is why it has these three here. And I would generally choose retro over tape, but I like tube as well because it might add a little bit of very subtle distortion in there. You have to use this cautiously. Here's why. If you use too much of this, it's like you're stabbing your listener in the ear with an ice pick. It gets really intense and really painful. And most radio transmission chains would have an aural exciter already built into it. So if you excite this with the exciter and make it brighter and really cool, and then it goes through the transmitter chain, it's going to come back really tinny and painful sounding. So little bits here, cautiously. Similarly with the Widener, what the Widener does is it takes the sound and spreads it out. So remember back in the 80s, you would have ghetto blasters that had a wide setting and the sound seemed to come from outside where the speakers were. Well, you can use this and widen this out, or you can narrow down your sound stage, it's called. So if you have it coming through two speakers, you can narrow this down so it sounds much tighter, or you can spread this out so it sounds much wider. Do I use this? Yeah, I actually do use this a lot. I really like it. But again, go cautiously on this, because if you're going to like the 100% or the 50% and somebody's listening in mono, what happens is stuff in your mix has a tendency of disappearing, and it's not necessarily the results you want. So do I use the exciter? Yes, I do. I use a little bit of it. I go cautious with that. If it starts to sound a little bit too bright, I would turn it down. When I hear something go through the transmitter chain, so when I'm monitoring my station and I hear my promo go through and I go, oh, that's getting tinny, I would go back and remix this and turn my exciter down. Widener, sure. Don't go nuts, right? Make sure you use it kind of appropriately. Loudness maximizer is just kind of a hard limiter, a compression thing. And again, it's more or less. Would I use a little bit of this? Sure. I think that's okay. I think there are better choices for compression tools. And then output gain. So as you start adding stuff like this, your levels can get higher and higher. So this lets you turn this down and not have your levels get out of control. It's called a mastering effect because you would want to do this once the mix is finished, once you've put everything together. So at the end, you would maybe excite it a little bit, you would widen it up a little bit, maybe hit it with a little bit of loudness maximizer. So you would put this in the mixer on the master output fader. So if I go back to my multi-track session, the mixer window will show up. So I might put the mastering effect over here, right? And then add in a little bit of exciter as needed, widen it up maybe a little bit just so it stands out a little bit, maybe add a little bit of loudness maximizer, depending on how hard I wanted to hit that. If the mix was a little muddy, yeah, then I might bring in a touch of EQ, probably not any reverb, and then that would be the last thing on the mix. And I wouldn't do this on everything. I would do this on something that I thought was really special. So can you use it on individual tracks in a mix or individual clips in an audio production? Yes, you can. It's not the way I would work with it, though. But I mean, there's some good things there. The exciter and the Widener, I think, are really quite cool. Everything else here. So the loudness radar meter. This is really neat. So what this does is it shows you how loud your file or your mix is. And the real key here for me is the settings tab. And this is how you can adjust a mix if somebody's saying they have specific audio specifications. So if you're doing audio for a radio commercial and then they're going to do a TV commercial based on that radio commercial, they are going to want you to send it to the TV production house, send them the final mix. Well, they're going to have, it has to be this loud at this resolution. And here in this section is where you find that. The other thing that you would use this for, I know people that record audiobooks professionally, and their distributor insists that everything have a target loudness. And if you're too high on that, that's where you've got to turn things down until you get it exactly right. So this is kind of a new effect. I think this is really interesting. Are you going to use it a lot in radio? Not necessarily, but if you're sending stuff out and they're telling you it has to have a certain loudness specification, here's where you find out what you are. And I will notice here, TC Electronic is a great Danish, I believe, production or audio manufacturer, and the stuff they build for recording studios is really, really high-end stuff. So there's a lot of thought that goes behind this, and it's really interesting that Adobe was able to add it to the Audition program. The very last thing in the special menu is the vocal enhancer. And this might be one of those things that if I catch you using it, I might slap your hand, because this is for people that really don't know what they're doing. It is a preset EQ and compressor, and you have 3 selections on this. Is this for male voice, for female voice, or for music? Really? No. If you need EQ, if you need compression, do it yourself. Make sure you get it the way you want it. Don't let this little piece of software decide that for you. I absolutely would never be using this. No. Okay, so that is the special menu. But wait, that's not it. There's more. With Audition and with any audio editing software, you can actually go in and add third-party software to it. You can plug in a module or piece of software. And generally, you would find that in the effects menu. And you're going to plug in a piece of software that may do the same as what's built into Audition. So you might plug in a compressor, you might plug in an equalizer, you might plug in any number of different effects. Why would I want to plug in a compressor when I already have several built in? That's an excellent question. Why would you want to do that? Well, maybe you like the interface better. Maybe you like how the third-party one is picture-based and doesn't have all the Audition slidey things. Sure, I'm okay with that. Maybe somebody has modeled one of those expensive pieces of software and made it a plugin, and you get that and attach it to Audition, and you think that works better than the compressor that's built into Audition. I'm also fine with that. Or maybe you think it sounds better, or it works better for whatever reason. Whatever reason you want to use a plugin, I think is fine. I try and find plugins that do stuff that Audition doesn't do. And I have collected hundreds of these over the years, because some of them are free, some of them I get sent to me, some of them I've actually bought, some of them come packaged with different things. So I have hundreds of these that I've saved over the years in various formats. And to do that, you go into Audition and you use the Audio Plugin Manager. And Audition uses the VST plugin format. And VST stands for Virtual Studio Technology. It's from a company called Steinberg. And VST is probably the most popular format you're ever going to find. And if you actually go into Google and search plugins, VST plugins, and scroll down, you will find 15,600,000 hits for VST plugins. Some of them are brilliant. Some of them are crap and not worth your time. How do you know which is which? You have to download and play with them. So when I'm adding plugins to Audition, I go to the plugin manager and I tell it where to find the plugin. And on this computer, they load to different places. So I've got stuff that's in program files. I have versions that I've had to bridge and sort of create workarounds for that are stored in one of my main files. And then when I scan for plugins, the program finds all of the plugins in these specific folders, and you can see that I've got a number of them installed right now, and I've got a number of them installed that I just haven't enabled into the software because it's either not working, or it's not working properly, or it's in mono, and I don't like working in mono. So once I get the plugins installed, and in some cases authorized, you can go and find them. And really worth your time to find really good plugins. So one of the companies I like is called iZotope, and iZotope also built the tube modeled compressor in Audition. And one of the things that I absolutely have been in love with since I started in computer audio, and I found this totally by accident, and this is free. This is from iZotope, and it's called Vinyl. And what Vinyl does is it makes everything sound like it's coming off a vinyl record. And you know, if you've used vinyl, that the first time you play something through, it's brilliant, right? It sounds amazing and deep and rich. But over time, you might get mechanical noise from your turntable, or you start wearing out the groove in the vinyl because you like it so much, or electrical noise in your stereo system. And if you don't clean the record right, it embeds dust and it has a scratch in it. And if you leave it out under a warm lamp, it'll warp. And various turntables from various eras sound different, also based on the speed of the record, whether it's at 33 1/3, 45, or 78. So what am I talking about? How much do I love this thing? Let me show you. So if I play this, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it down to 1960.
An iconic Canadian rock and roll band is celebrating 50.
So it puts an EQ in that a turntable from 1960 doesn't necessarily sound as good as a turntable from 1980.
An iconic Canadian rock and roll band.
Or from 2000, right? So 2000
An iconic Canadian rock and roll band is celebrating 50 years.
sounds just as good as the original. And of course, a turntable from 1930.
An iconic Canadian rock and roll band is celebrating 50.
So we just have the EQ preset built on that. Fine. So let's go back to 1960. So that has a bit of EQ.
An iconic Canadian rock and roll band is celebrating.
And let's go and now start adding stuff with these faders. So the first thing I'm going to add is some dust.
An iconic Canadian rock and roll band is celebrating 50 years. It'll be an unforgettable night, Thursday, October 3rd. That'll take you back to those sunny days with their unmistakable powerhouse sound of guitars, percussion, and horns. It's Lighthouse.
So that adds those little clicks that you get from an old dusty record. Or I could put a scratch in it. In fact, I'm going to have just one scratch, but it's going to be a big one.
An iconic Canadian rock and roll band is celebrating 50 years. It'll be an unforgettable night, Thursday, October 3rd.
And that's at a slow repeat because we're doing it at 33 1/3. If it was a 45, that goes faster.
An iconic Canadian rock and roll band is celebrating 50 years. It'll be an unforgettable night, Thursday, October 3rd.
And then maybe I left my record out under a lamp or in the sun, and it's got a warp in it now. Hang on, wrong button.
An iconic Canadian rock and roll band is celebrating 50 years. It'll be an unforgettable night, Thursday, October 3rd. That'll take you back to those sunny days with their unmistakable powerhouse sound of guitars, percussion, and horns. It's Lighthouse.
So starting to sound like a vinyl record. But since it's an old turntable and a dusty record, maybe there's going to be some wear on the stylus now.
An iconic Canadian rock and roll band is celebrating 50 years.
An electrical noise.
Night, Thursday, October 3rd. That'll take you back to those sunny days with their unmistakable powerhouse sound of guitars, percussion, and horns. It's Lighthouse, live at Belleville's Empire Theater.
So now I have done all kinds of EQ and added sound effects and put stuff through this So this sounds like a vinyl record. Have I used this? Yes, I have used this a lot. I love this. And the best thing is, it's free. You can download it now. They give you a serial number. You go to install it. You put the serial number in, add it through the plugin manager, enable it. It comes up VST, and then boom, instant turntable.
An iconic Canadian
Plus-
rock and roll band is celebrating 50 years. It'll be an unforgettable night.
I can spin something down. I can cut power to my turntable. I think this is brilliant. I love this. Whoever designed this, and by the way, if you undo the screws, this is cool. If you undo the screws, you can see who designed it. You can see what is supposed to be behind this. I love this. I love this. I love this. I love this. Everybody in the world should have this. It's fun to play with. It gives you cool sounds. So that is iZotope Vinyl. And if I go into my various plugins, vinyl, I can go to audio ozone elements. So this is like a mastering effect. So I have a 7-band equalizer here that I can grab things and manipulate as I see fit, right? So I'm drawing in an EQ curve. I am imaging something. So how wide do I want it to be? How stereo do I want it to be? Do I want to put little delays in there? This is really cool. This is a vector scope which shows the phase of things. And here is a built-in limiter which will even get those little transient spikes that sometimes really affect your levels. So I've just got this. It has presets for if I'm putting it on specific instruments, if I'm putting it in a specific type of music I was making, or presets for mastering all kinds of stuff. So Control Mud is, maybe I'm doing stuff with dance music and there's a little too much bass going on. So I can go in and play with that. And so I'm looking for stuff that Audition doesn't do. And I've been really good at finding things like that. So one of my other favorites is this thing called SSL Exorcism. And SSL is Solid State Logic. They're the people that make those giant recording consoles you've seen in studios. Sometimes they're so big they have to curve around walls. They have a computer built into them to control the mixer. They have the moving faders. This stuff is really, really cool. And they came out with this little plugin. And this is fantastic because it makes everything sound like Halloween. So let me start playing around with this.
An iconic Canadian rock and roll band is celebrating 50 years. It'll be an unforgettable night Thursday, October 3rd. That'll take you back to those sunny days with their unmistakable powerhouse sound of guitars.
It's Lighthouse live at Belleville's Empire Theater.
And again, I could play with this for hours. I used this on everything we did for Halloween promos. Guaranteed you everything I did from the moment I had this that came up on Halloween. So September into October, I used this thing a lot. And you can add echoes, you can add in reverb, you can play with the pitch, and you can sound like, ghouls wailing in the
An
background.
iconic Canadian rock and roll band is celebrating 50 years. It'll be an unforgettable night Thursday, October 3rd. That'll take you back to those sunny days with their unmistakable powerhouse
Sound of guitars.
percussion and horns.
It's Lighthouse
Live at Belleville's
Empire Theater.
It's just instant Halloween. Who doesn't love that? I think that's brilliant. The Solid State Logic plugins, you have to be really dedicated to find now. They've stopped supporting them. This was just stuff some of their computer programmers did for fun, and they put it out. So you have to really search for these now. But if you're interested in it, I can show you how to find them. The other thing that SSL did is something called the SSL Listen Mic Compressor. And there's a backstory on this. So the backstory on this was Phil Collins was providing drums for a Peter Gabriel record. And the producer was a guy named Hugh Padgham. And he was searching for a specific drum sound. And for some reason, Solid State Logic had put a compressor on what is called the talkback mic. The talkback mic is a mic built into the mixer to talk to people in the studio who have headphones on. So you would hit the talkback switch, the mic picks you up, and it goes to the headphones, and you can talk back and forth to whoever's in the studio and not have it get picked up by the mics. For some reason, they put a compressor on this. And for some reason, Hugh Padgham heard the sound of the drums going through the Listen mic compressor, and it was exactly the sound he was looking for. This led to the Phil Collins In the Air Tonight drum sound, that big, huge drum sound that has, no decay. It just kind of hits and goes away. And so they put this out so everybody could get the same drum sound. And I started playing with this, and this became the compressor sound we used on our station announcer voice because the program director liked it. This sounds really nasty. Okay, so let me play.
An iconic Canadian rock and roll band is celebrating 50 years. It'll be an unforgettable night, Thursday, October 3rd. That'll take you back to those sunny days with their
you can get that distortion by cranking it up and overloading stuff.
An iconic Canadian rock and roll band is celebrating 50 years. It'll be an unforgettable night, Thursday, October 3rd. That'll take you back to those sunny days with their unmistakable powerhouse sound of guitars, percussion, and horns. It's Lighthouse, live at Belleville's Empire Theater.
So you can hear that, the compression here is less or more, and when they say more, they mean a lot more. So I think for most compression needs, this stinks. But if I'm using it for that particular effect that I can't get any other way, I kind of like it. I kind of dig it. And like I said, this was the compressor we put on our station voice for the better part of 3 years. And it really helped him cut through. It really got processed quite well. And again, you have to really search to find this, but this is free. You don't even need an authorization or a serial number. This is free. Everything I have shown you so far, with the exception of Elements, Ozone Elements, is absolutely free. And if you're really quite good at stuff, you can figure out that certain companies will give stuff away at certain times of the year. And perhaps the biggest plug-in company in the world is a company called Waves. And they're famous for making plugins for Pro Tools. But they also put out VST plugins. And every year around American Thanksgiving, they tend to give away a plugin. And I've got a couple of plugins from Waves. So the last one that came in is something called Berserk Distortion. And I'm just starting to play with this one. I just kind of installed it for this. But this adds various kinds of distortion. And they have lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of presets that you can use. And this was free. So this is a VST plugin that just kind of adds distortion.
An iconic Canadian rock and roll band is celebrating 50
and you
years.
can hear compared to the distortion in Audition, this one I have a lot more control with. So this one I can be a lot subtler with. So that is the Berserk Distortion. The Waves also adds something called the One Note series. So they have a couple of things there. Let me find the one I'm looking for. We'll go with this one. So One Note Pumper. Again, this is one knob, so it's fairly simple. Notice that this has a rate to it, and the rate on this is in terms of notes. So it's got a quarter note, half note, whole note, down to a 30-second note. And what this does is it manually drops the sound down and picks it up on beat every quarter note. So it pumps the music in the background. So modern dance music that really boom, 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 that's what I call sucking sound, as the compressor sucks the sound down and then releases it on beat. This does it with the Waves one knob, and you can turn it down to have a little less or have it all the way cranked up to really pump something in on beat. And it was free, so sure, I will play with that over the course of time. They also have something called One Note Louder. Let me see if I can find it. One Knob Louder. There we are. And again, this is like the Listen Mic compressor. This is just a compressor where you have the choice of more or less. That's it, right? There is only one control here. And do I like this? I'm not sure I like this one yet, but it was free, so I will play around with it. Over the years, I've also picked up a couple of really great plugins from Waves. Let me find the one I need. So Waves TrueVerb. This is just a reverb, but this is really nice. Reverbs have what I call different weights. Some companies' reverb is really, really dense. Some is really, really light and very airy and works very well in stereo situations where it just seems to add some space and some presence. This is one of those. This is Waves TrueVerb. And it's just a different interface than what you're dealing with in Audition. And I think this is really nice. I really like this one. I've only used it a little bit, but I like the presets. I like how I can go in and adjust things on the fly. I can have a mix here of all the reverb sounds. And again, this I got because they put it out for free one Thanksgiving. There is one more thing from Waves that I'm trying to find. RS Bass, Renaissance Bass. This is great for dealing with dance music because you can pump up just the bass frequencies and you can adjust that with 3 sliders. So what's going to be your crossover frequency? Your crossover frequency, the effect is going to happen below that. Everything above it goes through. How much you're going to make that low frequency more intense, and then sort of a gain cut. So if you start adding stuff here, making it more intense, you probably have to drop your levels, and then a level meter. They also had a compressor like this, which I thought was brilliant. I had it in a different format that doesn't work with Audition, but Waves stuff is really great. They will sell you bundles that will have 400 different plugins with it, or bundles that have 10 plugins with it, and they're all for sort of specific purposes, and they can be really, really expensive. Like the Waves Ultimate plugin collection is everything they make, and it sells for something like $7,000. Back when you could actually buy Audition and it cost $350, the general manager really did not want to have that discussion on why am I spending $7,000 on top of a $300 piece of software. So Waves is pretty cool. There's other stuff that I've just downloaded and really haven't picked up on yet. Isotope has a dynamic delay where the delay is based on the music that is playing. There is a company called Vinomode that has an EQ that is built for making complementary EQ shapes. So do I want to have the low frequencies lower, like the tilt on this, or am I going to tilt it the other way and have the low frequencies higher, and showing various slope of those curves. So I mean I've just got a lot of this stuff in preparation for this, so I haven't used everything exclusively. Vinomode has built a combination dynamics processor with EQ that looks really interesting. Again, I haven't played much with it. And they have one more in dynamics. This is just a really hard, simple limiter. How much do I want to drive that loudness maximizer, that limiter? How fast do I want this to happen? Do I want it to be clean, loud, sound like tape or tube? So add some distortion to that. The quality, do I want it to sound really great, or do I want it to sound a little bit crappy? And what's the loudest I want it to go? So this is your output level that's going to drop it based on the drive. So this, and it looks like they're trying to make it emulate tube based. So maybe I like the interface on this more than the hard limiter in Audition. I think it looks cool. Maybe I think it sounds better. And like I said, with very few exceptions, all of those VST effects that I now have built in on this computer, both in VST or VST3 format, they're both very similar. Usually if they give you one, they give you both formats. So I have to sort of remove stuff. There is here's a company called Blue Cat, and they have gain and EQ settings for stereo or dual mono or even mono tracks. Their chorus, flanger, guitar amp, and phaser. I literally just downloaded these. I haven't played with them yet, but maybe I like this interface better than the interface that's built into Audition. So I can see input gain, I can see the mix, the shape of the modulation, how long I need the delay to be, the depth and rate and spread of the modulation, and the presets would be built in here, I believe. So, right, so I could cycle through and find different sounds just based on what they have built in. And it's just looking around and going through and maybe Googling free VST plugins and seeing what other people say about them. So I think this is cool. The other thing we can do that we haven't mentioned in Audition is here in the properties window where you can see the markers and stuff. It also has effects racks. So in waveform view, I can add a number of presets. Like I could add EQ and compression and hard limiter and reverb just like I would in the multi-track view in the mixer. So if I have a preset here that I really like, I can take it over to waveform and apply it to just an individual track. If I'm sending it out somewhere or for whatever reason I want to preload my effects. So I can use the effects rack to load in more than one effect at a time and then adjust them independently until I save it. When I save it, those changes are destructive. So that's with Audition. It's got built-in effects menus. You can add plugins. You can put them in effects racks, and you can do all kinds of things with that. In Pro Tools, let me open up Pro Tools first. Again, if we're going to insert an effect into Pro Tools, it has to come in the inserts. We've looked at the EQs. We've looked at the compressor. This is Pro Tools First, which is sort of a stripped down version of Pro Tools. In the real version of Pro Tools that we have installed at the Loyalist College Studios for second years, Pro Tools adds additional plugins. So they have a simple time adjuster, which is just a basic delay. That is the delay module in Audition. So you can move stuff around by number of samples or number of milliseconds. It has the sci-fi module, which makes your voices very modulated and very weird 60s sci-fi sound. So this is sort of based on flanging and phasing, and it has something built into it called an envelope follower and a ring modulator. So it sounds really, really different, hard to describe without actually playing it for you. Unfortunately, I can't because it's not in my version of Pro Tools. Lo-fi makes things sound like crap, but in a good way. So sometimes you need to make things sound dirty and distorted to make it stand out to the listener. And I'm a big lo-fi fan. So this makes things sound not as good, kind of. You could, if you're familiar with computer audio and you remember computer audio when it first started, the 8-bit video games and how crappy the video was and how crappy the audio sound was, well, you can set that up here by having, instead of 24-bit audio, you can have 8-bit audio. The amount of distortion and noise that you put into stuff. In addition, it has Rectify, which is like a Pro Tools version of a guitar distortion. Not bad. Not bad. I mean, you can adjust the wet, dry mix, and it has output gain adjust. So I would like this better than what is built into Audition. And then the other thing that Pro Tools has, it has a series of amp simulators built in. So that's in the full version of Pro Tools. Here in the Pro Tools first version, you really only have two. The first thing you have is Deverb, which is their reverb program. It's really good. Don't get me wrong. I quite like that a lot. And works quite well. Has some presets in it. Sounds very nice. Totally adjustable. Really worth your time if you're in Pro Tools. The other thing it has is modulation delay, which in fact combines chorus, flanging, phasing to an extent, and delay. So you can dial in how high you want your delay to be, up to 5-second delays. You're going to spend a lot of time probably with the shorter delay times. It has modulation on left and right channels, independent left and right mix. This is if you are using delay based to tempo of a session. So quarter note, whole note, half note, eighth note, 16th note, and you can dot those too. So you can have dotted quarter notes. Those of you who are familiar with music theory know all about that. Groove just kind of adjusts how rigid the timing is. So I think this is a great module. I really like this one. So voice effects, we are going to use them to target specific areas of our script that we want to highlight for the listener. We want them to draw their attention and keep them engaged in our promo. We want to use this stuff because it sounds cool. We just don't want to overuse it. Okay, so it's available both in Audition. You can add third-party plugins, VST, into Audition. In Pro Tools, in Pro Tools Free, you have limited voice effect capability of a couple things built in, and you can add in what's called Audio Suite or RTAS plugins. I have nothing in the RTAS format, so I haven't plugged in anything extra into Pro Tools. The problem with RTAS plugins, there's usually very few free ones, and Pro Tools is only taking RTAS format. It does not take VST. So I would strongly suggest that you need to spend some time playing with this stuff. You're going to want to be tempted to use it a lot, and I think that's cool. Play with it. Make really neat sounds. Use multiple voice effects on your voice. If I go back here to Audition and to my multi-track session and the mixer, you can see that I might have a delay with an EQ on it, or an echo and a delay. I might have the mastering on my master output to add that enhancer, to add that widener, just to make my promo a little bit bigger. So when you're hearing it on the radio, it just kind of explodes into your consciousness. I'm trying to reach out. I'm trying to get somebody's attention, make them pay attention to my promo, whether it's 30 or 60, and make them go, yeah, that's really cool. They may not know all the details. In fact, they don't need to know the details. What they need to know is go, I like that, and I like that station. One last thing. There are other effects that you can use, of course. So if you go to the effects menu, there's simple ones. simple ones here in clip where I can reverse a piece of audio. So if I go here, I can reverse it. I can invert the phase on it. But now if I start doing that, if I reverse a piece of audio, put an effect on it, and then reverse it again, as opposed to my effect tailing out, now my effect is tailing into my voice piece. And this is a video from your friend and mine, Dave Fox. Now, he's doing this in Pro Tools. The commands are a little different, but watch what he does with a piece of audio, copies it, reverses it, puts reverb on it, reverses it again, lines it up with his multitrack, and then all of a sudden he's got sound that's coming in, and it looks like it's the sound happening before it actually happens. It's called inverse masking.
Hello, Dave Fox from Studio X, New York with another web tutorial. This is about something you probably won't do too often, but when you do, it sounds really cool. I call it inverse masking.
First, let's listen to this promo I did last fall. Enrique Iglesias is coming to the Prudential Center next week.
Baby, I like it.
Along with Mr. 305, Pitbull.
Promise tonight.
Win your tickets here all weekend. Plus, qualify to win a pair of tickets to see Enrique anywhere in the world.
Bonjour.
Konnichiwa.
Hola.
Buongiorno.
G'day.
For life.
Tonight I'm loving you.
Sponsored by Lexus and Universal Republic Records. Extra chances at Z100.com. Keyword Enrique. Okay, let's isolate that little bit of audio where I speak right after the international voices. That's where we're going to add some inverse masking. For life. All right, let's separate it from the parent file by using Command E. And just to make sure it doesn't go jumping where you don't want it, let's put it in slip mode. Then we'll use Control Option Click Drag to make a copy onto the next track. This is what we'll work with. Now we'll use a series of Audio Suite plugins, beginning with Reverse, which actually reverses the file so it's backwards. Now, the effect we're going for is to put reverb in front of that, so it's backwards. Now we're going to open up some reverb. Here we're using the Digirac plugin Deverb and a standard setting. Let's add some tail so we have some decay time. We'll add 3 seconds to the file and simply hit Process. Bingo. As you can see, the level's kind of low, so we're going to normalize this before we go to the final step of reversing it again. Just hit normalize and it'll pop it up to 0. Now let's go back and reverse the entire piece once again. Alright, now this gets a little tricky because you want to make sure that the back of each of these segments match up time-wise in the timeline, because that's the only way they're going to sync. Drop the line, use Control-Click, and they're aligned. Now we're going to use Option-Click and Drag to copy the file, put it in shuffle mode, and hit Delete. Now they're aligned, and it sounds like this. In the world.
Bonjour.
Konnichiwa.
Hola.
Buongiorno.
G'day.
For life.
Tonight I'm loving you.
There you have inverse masking. Like I say, you won't use it too often, but when you do, it sounds cool. I'm Dave Fox. Thanks for watching this web tutorial. Tell your friends about it. See you next time.
Cool, huh? Simple. Reverse it, reverb, reverse it again, line it up. Now the sound sucks in as it's happening and sucks the listener into exactly what you are saying in that line in the promo. Worth your time? Absolutely. Play around with stuff. Take something simple and put it with something else and it becomes more complex. Separate video for this week's assignment. Please take the time to play with these effects. They're great. They really work. They really make your sounds more creative.